After Sunday is a podcast dedicated to connecting what ministers do on Sunday, what they say on Sunday, how they share the Word of God on Sunday, to everyday life. And we're elated to have you, Andrew, and your wife, Alyssa, and your awesome kids at Tower of Pentecost for this weekend. And I wanted to give our church, and anybody else watching, frankly, I wanted to give our church an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better, because you've had a pretty amazing upbringing in the church, and it's a little bit, it's not conventional, really. You know, you're not your stereotypical kid that grew up in America. And I'm not going to steal your thunder. I want to hear some about your story, but Caleb and I are elated to be here with you, and I just want to talk some about your story, where you are now, and then back up to the beginning and work our way up and talk about just a few relevant issues too. The more controversial, the better, just in general. That's the main thing. Keep that in mind. We keep that in mind. But tell us where you are now. Just give us the 90-second version of where Andrew and Alyssa are now and what you're doing in the kingdom.
Okay. So Alyssa and I pastor in South Haven, Mississippi, which is basically 1 to 2 miles south of the Memphis, Tennessee state line.
Yeah.
And so we've been there for 7 years. We planted the church 7 years ago, and it's been a work in progress, but it's moving forward, and with a lot of elbow grease and just getting in there and doing the work, which you know what that's like, for sure. And we do that. I work for a bank, make ends meet.
So bivocational.
Bivocational, for sure. And then I live right there in the Mississippi area in DeSoto County. My parents live there with us next door, and so we just have a lot of things happening there locally. Yeah. But the church is doing well. God has been good, and looking forward to what he's going to do in the future for us.
This awesome. So, Caleb, hope you're paying attention. We have a banker sitting here with us, and we need to put a check mark in this and make sure that we keep this on the forefront of our ideas, because we're liable to need some money at any point. And
I thought you were going to say I was going to get investigated or something. I was like,
no. Actually, what I was thinking is we could turn this into a hostage situation and get some cash to get a new building.
Beautiful.
There you go.
Yeah.
One way or another, the kingdom will be advanced.
Absolutely.
So, awesome, and it's been my privilege to be there in your church before, and it's a pretty incredible thing what you're doing. You've got some amazing people that you're doing it with, and I love church planning, but I love church planners more. And so it's just a phenomenal thing to have you here. And I tell you what, before we go all the way back and talk about your childhood and your upbringing, tell us about how God called you and how where you are now captured you and Alyssa's heart to go there and plant that church.
Okay, so calling to pastor was actually at 12 years old.
Wow.
I had felt that, we were growing up overseas, and I just felt the call. I never felt the call to be a missionary, and I'm not saying I wouldn't. If the Lord told me to go, I'm gone. That's just how that goes. But I felt the call to pastoring people, and so through time, moved back to the States when I was about 18 years old, went to college, did all that fun stuff, got my bachelor's from Gateway and associates from Jackson State, did all those things, worked in youth ministry for years.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw me out there as part of Tennessee.
Yeah, we spent a little time together. Yeah.
Yeah, worked all the camps for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And then Alyssa and I got married. We kept working camps, kept doing those things. And where we are, basically in 2000, and make sure I get this year right, about 16, we felt like things were changing in our life. Yeah. And so we began to pray about what's next. Where are we going? What are we doing? And we prayed about different places. I'd always been a Tennessee boy. I wanted to be a Tennessee boy. I love Tennessee, always will. But the Lord led us to South Haven. Yeah. The good news is this is as close to Tennessee as you can get without actually being in Tennessee.
Yeah. For anybody who's ever been down there in that area, in that West Memphis area, I mean, it's, even though you've got the barrier of the river and state line there, I mean, let's be honest, it is a what would you say, a metropolitan community of Memphis, I'm assuming, something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's greater Memphis. It's a suburb, basically, of Memphis. I mean, you've got there in Memphis, you got Germantown, Collierville, Olive Branch, South Haven, Horn Lake, Marion, West Memphis, Millington, all those areas.
It's impressive how well you know that area.
I love that area.
Yeah.
And, you've got about 1.6 million people just in
that was going to be my next question. That's amazing. 1.6 million. That's enormous, because here in Knox County, we've got about 500,000. I didn't realize Memphis was that much larger. That's astounding.
Yeah, it's a big area, and it's not churched enough, to be quite honest.
Guarantee you.
Mm-hmm. I would say inside Tennessee, in that area, if I remember correctly, it's about 11 to 13. But I know there's been some church plants, which are exciting.
Yeah.
But when I was last there, it was about 11 actual churches, but that has increased. I'm pretty sure it's between 13 and 15 now.
So come back to it. God started dealing with you and your wife's heart about where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Talk just a little bit about that, answering that call, and what your first. Let's just talk about your first 2 or 3 steps.
Sure. So in a time of transition, I had found myself at Collierville First Pentecostal Church under Terry Hunt as my pastor at the time.
Yeah.
And I expressed to him when I arrived there that I did not know how long I would be there, but as long as I was there, I would do whatever he needed me to do.
How long were you there?
About 7 months.
Okay.
So we were praying about where to go, and where does the Lord want us to go?
Right.
And the more we prayed about it, the more we felt drawn to South Haven. Yeah. And everywhere we turned, it just kept being South Haven. So I didn't want to have a moment where I just don't listen. Yeah. And so I began to pursue that. And so the next step was then to talk to, obviously, Pastor Hunt, and talk to him, explain what I was feeling. Sure. He was 100% on board. He's like, that's great. That's cool. What we can do to help you, we'll do. And then we got connected to, at the time, Brother Danny Robbins, who was the Mississippi North American Missions Director.
Awesome, yeah.
And so we talked to him, talked to our General Superintendent, Brother Tipton there. He actually came to Collierville to preach, which I thought was pretty interesting.
That is cool, yeah.
And so we got to connect there, talked to Brother Robbins. He told us the steps to take. He was very excited about it. And so then we started to move forward with that, got our applications submitted, and just started following the process.
I love that you illustrated that process as a handful of conversations. It's not some cold, logistical, fill out this form thing. It truly is. It truly is a God-called thing. And it's facilitated by, let's say, sincere communication between people that you've placed your confidence in, and they're providing a covering in your life and help facilitate. You mentioned the word transition. That's an amazing thing. Now, I've got enough sense to know that I'm sure there were moments where you felt like this isn't going fast enough, or this is going too fast, or why am I even doing this? There's always those moments in the middle of it. But here, in hindsight, off the cuff, I didn't prep you for that question at all. Off the cuff, you illustrated a handful of conversations that transitioned you into that pastoral role that God called you to when you were 12. Here's the next question. How does your perspective of pastoral ministry differ now compared to what you thought God was calling you to when you were 12 years old?
That's a fantastic question.
Thank you. I do this every day.
Or at least once a week.
Sometimes twice.
Yeah. So I guess as a younger, even a child, because at 12, obviously, I was mentally nowhere close to being able to pastor. But I think where it differs is your idea of a pastor is somebody who gets up and preaches on Sunday and, greets everyone, smiles, is friendly. Yeah. And that part still happens now. But
gotta do that.
What you don't know is all the things that go on behind the scenes. Okay. The hours of prayer that you feel for people. Right. The conversations, the going out of your way to make sure everyone feels welcome at the church. Because unfortunately, people are people, and you'll have somebody come in the church that people may not like for whatever predisposition reason they have in their heart. Sure. And you've got to make sure you bridge that gap, and you're that person that keeps them connected and loves them and shows them Him. And then hopefully as you do that, your people will see like, hey, it's not about what you want, it's about the kingdom.
Yeah.
We need to be kingdom minded. That's kind of what I've been focused on. Matter of fact, our theme for this year has been committed. That's it. Just simply the word committed. And
awesome.
Committed to the kingdom.
Yeah.
Look, what can we do to build God's kingdom? And that's kind of what we've been focused on all year.
So you're saying your perspective of pastoral ministry at 12 was very idealistic?
Yes.
I don't want to use the term shallow, but...
I'll use it.
Okay.
It wasn't deep. I hadn't given a whole lot of
Let
thought.
me just say something. The fact that a 12-year-old is even considering that, that's an astounding thing. So, and by the way, Caleb, I'm sorry, I don't want to capitalize on this conversation. Anytime you want to jump in with a question, just jump in.
Yeah.
Make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I was going to say real quick is that for a 12-year-old individual to feel a call to pastorship and not immediately be like, no way. You know what I mean?
That's
like
amazing. That's a good perspective.
That's a huge, because like I think about where I was at that age, and like, and I had parents who, had raised me very well. I was very privileged in that sense. I'm sure we'll get into your upbringing, your childhood, and I'm sure it probably speaks a lot to your parentage that at 12 years old you didn't immediately think no.
Yeah.
But for me, like,
point.
I think even I, like, being raised the way I was, like, I had so many other dreams or ideas, and it wasn't until I became a late teenager and even into my early 20s that I came to the acceptance of God's ways and God's plans are higher than my plans.
Yeah.
Because I had planned out, we talked a little bit about what I do for work and stuff. That plan was my dream since I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
Not a joke. Since like 2001, that was what I wanted to do and at some point I had to be like, I did feel a call into ministry, not necessarily pastorship, but into some form of pulpit ministry. And I thought, how much of my dream do I have to give up to do that?
Yeah.
And most 12-year-olds are like, what am I going to be when I grow up? You know what I mean? And probably starting to have ideas of what you want to do. So I think that's admirable, like you said, that at that age, you would even say, yeah, that could be possible.
That's an incredible perspective. And that made me think there must have been people in your life who modeled pastoral ministry that gave you that openness toward it. Or I would assume that's the case. Maybe you could speak to that real quick. When you were accepting the call into pastoral ministry at 12, who was influencing you? And maybe if that goes back to a moment, I don't know if you have that, if there was a moment where you felt like God was calling you into pastoral ministry. I know there was an age. You said age 12. I don't know if there was a moment or a time or a month or a week or whatever. Talk to us just a little bit more about that and that time. And then also the influences that were icons, if you will, as you accepted that call into pastoral ministry.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to have the parents that I have. I don't take that lightly. I'm very thankful.
They're incredible people. They really are just phenomenal.
I'm very biased, but they are.
I love them. I love them.
They modeled that for me.
Yeah.
Dad pastored for a total of 17 years before becoming a missionary for 30.
Wow.
So he showed me, I was born in Jackson, Tennessee, in Jackson General Hospital.
Yeah.
We pastored in Henderson before we took the call to go to Africa to be missionaries. And even then he told us, like, this is not my call. Like, this is our family's call.
It's amazing.
And I need to know that you all, even when I was 6.5 years old, he's needing my buy-in. He's needing me to be invested in this because he doesn't want to just say, hey, this is what we're doing and you're all going.
Back up. I don't want anybody to miss this. You're saying that when your dad came in and said, God's calling us to go to Africa,
yeah,
he asked for buy-in from his sons, of which, are you the youngest?
I think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm
at
the favorite
6,
son.
I don't doubt that, son. I know your brothers. At 6.5 years old, your dad is needing your buy-in. I think that was your exact word.
He wants, yes, he
That's
wants
amazing.
us to be, because it's a family calling.
Yeah.
Ministry is always a family calling.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the mistakes we make is when, and this may ruffle feathers, but I think a lot of the mistakes that ministers make is when they make a calling and they don't incorporate their family into the calling. So it becomes his or her ministry, not their ministry.
I agree.
And then resentment begins to grow because when you're in ministry, it's so much sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like you don't hardly get time away. Like being here this weekend for us is wonderful, but it's our first time to be out of our area in this year, basically.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it's just we stay busy doing the things that we're called to do. But that was something I learned is it's got to be the family that's involved. And so we try and incorporate the same thing with our kids and letting them know, like, this isn't daddy's church or mommy's church. It's God's church, and we are his vessels, and we want them to be involved in ministry, and they do little things throughout, holding babies, or whatever they can do to help so that others can do what they need to do.
Absolutely.
So, yes, the buy-in has to be there for the whole family, because if there's not buy-in, then typically it's replaced with something like bitterness.
Wow.
That's a Facebook quote. If there's no buy-in, it's replaced by bitterness.
That's absolutely the case.
Yep.
And we've seen it. We've seen it in pastoral homes with pastoral kids.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, so my upbringing was in a way a little bit similar. When I was 10 years old, I'm sorry, when I was 2 or 3, my dad felt the call to full-time evangelism, to travel the country. But that didn't manifest until I was about 9 or 10 years old. And, he asked my pastor at the time, we were living in Connecticut, he asked him, for his guidance, his pastor at the time, and said, I want you to commit to the church for a certain amount of years. I believe that God is calling you, and it's all legit, but it's going to be, a process, and it's going to come to fruition at a certain time. And when I was 10 years old, that time came. We sold our house, pool, yard, everything a kid could want, and we bought a Freightliner and a fifth wheel trailer. And that's what me and my sister grew up in, basically, from ages 10 to 18 or 19. But what resonated is when you said there was buy-in, because to be honest, my dad did the exact same thing, and I'm thankful for that. He was like, this is not my ministry. He told us many times over. I was 10 years old, my sister was 8. And he's like, this is a family ministry. And also, to some extent, you represent this family as well. He made sure that our behavior, represented the family, because evangelizing, you're in a new church every week. You know what I mean? Or maybe even if you're there for a long time, you're there for a month-long revival. You know what I mean?
Or if you ever get to come back, depends on how the kids act.
Guarantee you.
That's the truth.
This principle that both of you are illustrating, my dad says this goes all the way back to the Levitical priesthood. He said it is a principle that God utilizes in his kingdom, and it began with the tribe of Levi and the administration of the priesthood, and it carried over into the New Testament. He said that's why we see such strong paternal relationship bonds, even when it wasn't biological, like in the case with Paul and Timothy and these other young men, that he is not just mentoring and pastoring, but also he is fathering, as self-admitted. So I think there's a tremendous amount of truth in what both of you guys are saying. And one of my biggest heartbreaks is seeing pastors' kids not live for God.
Yes.
And that's where I think last Sunday I was teaching about how do my kids experience and value, not just experience, but experience and value who we are as apostolic people. I want them to experience it, but I want to know more about how they value it. What is it worth to them? And ultimately only time will tell. Right. But with you, it's manifested into a ministry that doesn't mirror image what your parents did, but there's a lot of similarities and their influence. I know, I've been there, and I know your parents, and I know you. I know their influence is still very present in your life. So let's come back to that point you were making, and that story that you were telling us. 6.5 is when you were, how old you were whenever y'all went to Africa, but you said your call to pastoral ministry happened at age 12.
Yeah.
So, so you at this point, I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Born in Jackson, raised there in the Henderson area. Basically, all of your known life at that point, your dad had been pastoring in Henderson. Is that right?
Yes.
At what is now the Pentecostals of Henderson, I think is the name of that church? Okay. So 6.5, dad comes in. I need your buy-in. I feel called to Africa. If we go, we're going as a family. Take us forward.
Okay. So we go, and we move through Deputation, go to Africa.
Which part of Africa, by the way? I was just curious.
Madagascar was where we first went.
Madagascar was your first go. Some people listening or watching this podcast may not be familiar with Deputation. Can you illustrate that?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Sorry.
It's okay.
So Deputation is simply you get given a schedule all throughout the United States, different states, and you travel from church to church to raise funds for 4 years at a time, so that you can be gone from the United States for up to 4 years.
So it was a 4-year deputation process for y'all then?
No, it was about a year and a half.
Oh, it was a year and a half.
Yeah,
okay.
But you're raising money for 4 years.
Okay, I understand. Now, my mistake.
Yeah, your term is 4 years, but back then we didn't have this like now, and I love the fact that they can raise budgets at conference and send people and cut months, even years off of their schedules. That is phenomenal. But it wasn't quite that way back then.
Right.
And so you had to travel all of the United States, raising money and getting pledges for partners. And most of the time they wanted $25 commitments from the church per month for 4 years at a time.
Right.
Well, $25 a month, you're going to need hundreds of those to be able to function like you need to function over there. This
would have been in the early 90s?
Late 80s. 89, I think. 89 or it was. I think it was 89 when we landed.
Okay. In Madagascar.
In Madagascar.
Amazing.
And so we were there until 93, and then back home for another deputation.
Okay.
And then back to Malawi.
Yeah.
Where we stayed there for a while, and thankfully the partners were very faithful. Mom and Dad, the partners they had were tremendous. And I will give a shout out to Tennessee on that.
Come on now.
Dad told me flat out that the state of Tennessee, the pastors of Tennessee, were the most faithful.
That's amazing.
In supporting their ministry overseas.
It's a great heritage.
It is. Yes, absolutely.
It's a great heritage. So 4 years in Madagascar, is that right? And then come back for another deputation. What was Madagascar like?
Madagascar was, and this is from that mind of a young person.
What was it like being there from, how old were you?
6.5, 7.
Okay, from age 7 till age 11.
Yes,
something like
close
that.
To that area.
All right. So, what was that perspective like?
So, I had a blast. There's no lions or hyenas or anything deadly in Madagascar. The most deadly thing they have is a boa constrictor. But they don't attack humans for the most part.
There's those lemurs on the mask, or is that just the movie?
Lemurs are fine.
Okay,
I had a pet lemur for a while.
Oh no!
So
tell you what,
no big deal there. They were fun.
Yeah, my dad's just traveling America, boring animals. You had a pet lemur.
Hey, it was fun.
That's so cool.
Jamin's gonna watch this. He's like, Dad, God's calling us to Madagascar. I feel it. Let's go.
Well, you're gonna get shaken awakened next morning.
Dad, I want a lemur. Isn't God calling us to Africa?
Just don't get the ring-tailed lemurs. They will attack you.
That's amazing.
They're very aggressive. But anyway, we had those. So there was no danger there for me for the most part as far as wild animals. So I explored all over the place. I found caves. John and I, my middle brother, he's about 18 months older than me. We went all over the place.
It's amazing.
Had a great time. And so Madagascar has a lot of great memories.
Now would be a good time for me to say I really do love your brothers. I spoke derogatory earlier, but I'm pretty sure either one of them could beat me up. I really do love John and Philip a lot. They're great guys.
Me too. Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of and please, this might be an ignorant statement. Like, how much? Like, what's the population of Madagascar like? Like, in my mind, it's a large-ish landmass, but I don't know how many people or how many cities they really have there.
If I remember correctly, it's I think it's the 5th largest island in the world.
Yep.
And I don't know the population.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's ironic. I was actually invited to go to Madagascar a few days ago, and I'm seriously.
You should go.
I'm going to
go. Wait, are you serious?
Yeah.
All right, so
not long term.
The whole no.
God's not calling.
He's not going to missionary.
He might be. I mean,
no. I know, but you just said that Jamin's going to want a lemur, and now you just admitted in the span of a minute that you have an invite.
I hope Jamin doesn't watch this podcast.
You're gonna have to block it on YouTube for him.
That's funny.
So 4 years there, good experience overall.
Absolutely.
Come back for deputation, go back to Malawi. How old were you when you went to Malawi?
About 12.
So this is about that time frame when God's calling you into pastoral ministry.
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
So it was just kind of when you're younger, you're searching for what, at least I was searching for what I was supposed to be. And I always want to know what's next.
Yeah.
And so I don't know I can say there wasn't a specific moment when God's like, light shining, you're going to pastor.
Right.
But it was more of as I was praying and trying to figure out what am I doing. Because being raised in Dad's house, we're always focused on how to grow. And so that's what I was going to Bible school at 12 in Africa. All the night classes I took, me and John both did.
It's amazing.
And so, we were learning at that age things that, most 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds don't know. That
was something I was about to ask. I don't know how many 12-year-olds are. Let's speak for myself. At 12, I don't remember really, and I had those moments at camps and conventions, where I'd really seek God. But I don't know that I really got serious about my life personally, about what am I supposed to do with what, God would have me to do until I was at least 16 and really 18. And if I'm honest, I really got serious with God about the time I was 20, about what am I going to do with my life kind of thing. So at 12, that was already in you. I want to ask you, do you feel like being in a ministerial home and or missionary ministerial home forces you to grow up faster?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. And also I will say that not living in the United States didn't put me in the same situations that all the 12-year-olds here in.
Illustrate that.
I didn't have peer pressure at all.
That's astounding.
I don't have anybody trying to get me to smoke this, drink that, go to this party, do this, do that. None of that was a part of my life at all. Because it didn't exist for me. I had Mom, Dad, John, and Phil, and then after the first 4-year term, I had Mom, Dad, and John because Phil stayed here, went to college, and then the third time I went back, it was me, Mom, and Dad, and so I didn't have John, and so at that point, where am I going to spend my time? And so, I think you have to grow up faster because there's expectations. I know at 16 years old, I was driving bricks out to some of the churches in the country to help them get their churches built because
so cool.
I could. And, I had an international driver's license, and even though they drive on the wrong side of the road and the steering wheel's on the opposite side and you learn to shift with your left because everything's stick shift over there.
Yeah.
And you drive, it's crazy, but yeah, it is. But, so I think, yes, you have to grow up faster.
Yeah.
You don't struggle with the same stuff, if you will. I'm grateful for it. I don't view people the way a lot of people do. I don't have any feelings towards any group of anybody. People are just people to me. Period.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And so it's nice, honestly.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Not have to deal with that mentally or emotionally or any other way.
Yeah. So in Malawi, about that 12th year, that's when God's calling you to pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Define what the pastoral role is now.
Define the role. Well, for me, it's making sure that whatever is part of my flock is ready to meet Him. That's my number one.
Yeah.
I've got to make sure that they're there, and that when I get held accountable for them, that there's nothing. I don't want there to be anything said like you didn't tell them this or you didn't tell them that.
Yeah.
And so, for me, it's about educating them on the things of God. I do a ton of Bible study on Wednesday night.
Mm-hmm.
We break down every book in the Bible, in the New Testament.
But that teacher thing, that's in you from your father.
Absolutely.
I know that. And I know your father's teaching capabilities, and it's inevitable that that's in you too. So you're a block off the old chip. There's no doubt about that. But I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. You do a lot of teaching.
A lot of teaching. And so Wednesday night for us is when Pastor teaches. And then Sundays, Dad teaches the adult Sunday school. And then we have all our different Sunday school class. And then I typically preach 3 of the services, maybe 4. But I always have one of the other guys. 4th Sunday's always their Sunday. And we just have it broken up between all the different guys that are there.
That's awesome.
So that they're getting to hone their skills. Because the goal is to build more churches for us.
Yeah.
Like I've already got plans. As soon as we get to where I feel like we can do it, we're going to plant another church.
It's awesome.
And plant another, and hopefully just keep planting churches.
That is a global missionary protocol, though, isn't it? Isn't that kind of how global missionaries do it? They go in and they work on building church planters and facilitating church plants.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Because there's no way that effectively I could pastor 2 churches or 3 at the most.
Right.
But at that point, and of course, when you get up to 100 people, typically you can only pastor 100 people without having help. And even then, I question that number.
Yeah.
Because it seems like 100 people with one person is a whole lot.
Yeah.
But that's what statistically is supposed to be accurate. But if I can train other people, then I can actually reach a whole lot more.
That's awesome.
Then, like, say I'm tapped out at 3. That's the most I can do. Well, then I'm done. But if I can train 4 or 5 more to each start one, and then they train 4 or 5 more, we're growing at a much more exponential rate than if it's just me.
So let's talk about that. Paul served as an apostle, ministering to multiple congregations, some directly and some indirectly through the pastors of those churches where they were. What do you think the difference is in between a pastoral role and an apostle role? And if you, I haven't fed you any of these questions.
No.
And I know that is it's either a curveball or it's a fastball, one of the two.
Yeah.
But I genuinely, this conversation is happening a lot, Andrew, in our movement. And I feel like we need to be part of that conversation. So I want to know what you think.
So if I look at the biblical way apostle had leaders underneath them.
Sure.
And they trained them and they sent them out.
That's exactly right.
That's what I would look at and define as an apostle based on what I know of Scripture.
Right.
A pastor is called to a local church.
Okay.
So a pastor is to pastor this group of people, and he might pastor 2 churches or 3, but he's called to a local. I think an apostle replicates themselves through others.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, we're not going to be carbon copies of each other, but
right.
But the ministry, like I would go so far as say Billy Cole was an apostle.
I would agree
with what he did and all the men that came from underneath him. Like some of the most amazing preachers of the gospel came from there. I think sometimes we throw that term around really loosely, and we're looking to call people apostles that are not.
Right.
But that's not a sword that I'm willing to draw or fight. I'm going to stay in my world and focus on our church and what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
But I think an apostle, if you want to define an apostle, I think you need to look at who their offspring is spiritually speaking.
Good.
And see what that looks like.
I did a study on apostleship, and there were a couple of things that I came to a conclusion on. Number one, not all disciples become apostles. Mm-hmm. But all apostles must be disciples. Mm-hmm. That was the number one thing that I learned. And that's where this self-appointed apostleship is done away with. Right there, you're done with that. If you're not a disciple, then there's no way you can become an apostle.
Right.
And Paul referred to himself as an apostle, and so some have said, well, he's self-appointed. That's not entirely true. If you study his ministry and his life closely, he was one of the most humble guys who ever preached the gospel, and God appointed him to that apostleship role. And like you said, he mentored and developed other men. The other thing that I discovered about apostleship is an apostle is one who carries dispatches. He is not the originator of the order. He merely is the messenger directly from the throne, and he carries those dispatches. That's one of the greatest illustrations that I found of apostleship, a sender who is sent. He is a communicator. He's not always going to be the doer. I think you've illustrated some of that. He's not going to have his hand directly on everything that happens in his ministry, but in his ministry there will be either a second, a third, fourth, or maybe even fifth degree of separation, depending on how deep his influence runs in the sons of the gospel that he's leading. Is there space in the modern church for apostleship?
Well, I think there has to be, but I think it has to be. We have to be careful, because you'll get people calling themselves apostle who wouldn't know an apostle from anything.
Yeah.
Is there also more room, and maybe this is an unfortunate thing, but is there more room for apostleship in global missions and overseas because there's more of a prevalence and a priority put, I believe, on Bible school, Bible training up basically people like you illustrated who can train someone or someone's, and one puts 4 or 5 ministers to flight. They begin their own churches, and there's more of a sphere of influence. Where I think here in the Western culture, I think maybe there's more, like, even people who I might in my mind immediately associate with apostleship are also pastors of a local church.
Yeah,
I'd say it's pretty close.
Are you saying that maybe
and I'm not saying that
non-Western cultures
might have a better grip on it,
are more open to the administration of apostleship than the Western culture? Is that what you're asking?
I don't know. I don't think that I mean that they're more open to it, but just that it's exemplified more. Yeah. I'm wondering if it's just not as common.
I think you would have better insight into that than I would.
Yeah, I would say that it's more accepted in overseas, and not in every country. But I would say in the countries I've been to, is much more accepted that was the case, and that would be the scenario. I feel like, from what I've seen, it's in the Western civilization, it's more resisted. It's almost like it's a coveted title. Like I would like to be called an apostle, and I don't think it's anything that we should pursue. I think it's something that God does, and He makes who He will. Pastors, prophets, teachers, apostles, whatever the case may be. That's up for Him to decide, not for us. He qualifies who He wants to,
right?
And we shouldn't be pursuing titles. We should just be pursuing Him, and whatever He gives us in the process is fine. But I think, based on what I've seen overseas with what you're talking about, there is very much a respect for the elder, a respect for an elder minister. I've seen that time and time again. If an elder walks in, the younger guys are all getting up to give their seat away because he's an elder, he's respected. And I don't know if that equates to an apostle, but sure. I think there's a level of respect that's a little bit different there.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, part of what inspired that was I was actually able to spend some time overseas in India with my dad. So my dad took, for something like 10 years, he took an annual trip to southern India to work with Brother Sism, if you know him.
Yeah.
Or know of him.
I know him.
And you know him personally, don't you?
I do.
Yeah. And so I was privileged to meet him on a couple of different occasions. And so one of my dad's, I think, 10 or 12 trips that he took to India, I went with him. We were there for about 4 or 5 weeks. And exactly what you're saying, talking about like the younger ministers, the attendees in Bible school, like an elder walks in and there's immediate deference to what can we do for you? What do you need from us? You know what I mean? And I think I try to adopt that even in my own life. Pastor, I'll ask you, what do you need from me? Do you need anything? Yeah. And on a, maybe a lesser scale, but like it feels like that is so much more the level of respect there, and certainly not a holy or anything like reverent like that, but there is a respect that's just I've not seen duplicated in America.
So let's talk about the fivefold as a whole. The fivefold ministry: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. I think there was a time when I thought of the apostle as the head of the fivefold, and then those other come in under. I think as I've grown, I have developed the idea that the administration of ministry without any one of the five is incomplete. I don't so much think of them as rank and file anymore. I think of the fivefold as being mutually accountable. because I asked you what is pastoring to you, and you said having my people prepared to meet Jesus. And I don't think that's an exact quote, but I don't want to misrepresent you. I think that's what you said. And so that covenant that you have with those people to make sure you're doing everything within your ministerial power to prepare them to meet the Lord. There's really nothing that anyone else could have. There's nothing that anyone else could have that could supersede that. Really, that is a sincere covenant. On the other hand, that is not. There's others who have said, well, the pastor is the elite, right? The pastor is the highest rank and file of the fivefold. Again, I don't agree with that either. I believe sincerely that an apostle can serve a pastor to bring clarity, stability, wisdom. A prophet can minister to a congregation as a pastor welcomes him into that congregation to bring enlightenment and direction. A pastor is going to be in covenant with his people. He's a shepherd. He's not a hireling. Don't get me preaching about that. Jesus said not a hireling, but a shepherd, an under shepherd of the great shepherd. But then the evangelist also to come in and facilitate both outreach and revival of the body. But I wouldn't want to have a church without capable teachers, not just within the congregation, but outside the congregation that can come in and offer instruction that feeds the heart of this people. So when I think about the fivefold, I don't think about rank and file. I don't think about one being more important or more authoritative over the other. I genuinely believe in mutual accountability, mutual submission, and that being what God truly intended as he outlined it in Ephesians, to bring the people of God into that perfection and into that maturity to where they're no longer children tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine, as Paul said. Mm-hmm. So I want your perspective, and feel free to disagree with me on this podcast. There's no big deal about that, but that's where I'm at. Where are you at as you think about the fivefold and how it should work in the 21st century?
I think it has, obvious it needs to work together.
Yeah.
I think you need a little bit of everything. The joke I always say is, well, we're UPCI, we're a nonprofit organization. But because that seems to be the most lacking thing we have is prophets. Like, I don't know a lot of guys who call themselves prophets.
Wow.
In our organization.
I just caught the pun. It took me. I'm a little slower than Justin. Now, we're a nonprofit. So you're saying that the prophetic role of the fivefold is muted in our movement.
Do you see it very often? There
is a man who has ministered in our church and is coming back and ministers. I don't care to say it's oh my goodness, his name escapes me. I'll come back to it in a second. Gary Vick. There we go. Yeah. It's been a long day. Gary Vick is a prophet of God. I don't know if he would self-proclaim as a prophet. I don't really care. He is. Mm-hmm. He is to me. He is to this congregation. You were in a service with him.
Sure was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yes, I would absolutely agree.
He's a prophet of God.
I spoke with someone about that very service 2-3 days ago, and
we were discussing. He is absolutely a prophet of God. Now, don't ask me to name another one. So you may be right. There may be, but if I think about the Old Testament in particular, prophets were the minority. I would say, they were the minority then. But yeah, you feel like there is a lack, a deficit of prophetic ministry.
I do.
Okay.
I feel like pastors, obviously, we know we have those. Teachers, a lot of those.
Yeah.
Evangelists, obviously, there's not as many, but there's still quite a few evangelists.
Okay.
I don't see many prophets. Like, I just, and I think it's because the fear of, if I say this and it doesn't happen, then what?
Yeah.
And to be fair, if you're going to be a prophet, you got to be on. Like
Yeah.
you can't prophesy and then it never happen and still be considered a prophet.
Right.
So it's one of those things where I there's one guy, I cannot remember his name, but I know exactly what he looks like. He has white hair. And Justin Gleason told me that guy's a prophet.
Yeah.
And he's prophesied in our church. It came to pass.
Yeah.
And he's always right. And I wish I could remember his name right now. But I can see his face, but I just can't remember his name. But I would take that as, if Brother Stan Gleason and Justin are saying this, then I'm going to buy that because I know them.
Yeah.
And so and with you and Brother Vic, I would now trust that because I know you.
Yeah.
And you don't just proclaim things unless it's accurate.
Yeah.
And so I just don't think there's enough of them. Or if there is, they're out there, they're silenced maybe because sometimes what they say is not what people want to hear.
I think there's also a lot of doubt. I think like what you say is that maybe they're afraid of, hey, if this doesn't come to pass, then how does that reflect? But I think sometimes even when I've seen Brother Vic or Brother Tim Green comes to mind as well, when I've seen them minister, not only like they can be absolutely working in the Spirit, heard from God, and people will still say, well, I don't know if I would have said that. Like, I don't know if, there's some level of distrust and doubt even from a congregation being ministered to. And it's like, maybe that's part of the reason why you don't see it as often, because the response, I'm not sure, is always appropriate.
I think, too, sometimes we confuse the gift of knowledge with the gift of prophecy, or even the fivefold role of prophecy. There have been times I have prophesied personally. I would not say that God has called me to be a prophet in the fivefold. So I think that's something that we have to be very careful with. It comes back to that apostle thing. Someone who is seeking the title prophet or apostle or even pastor or evangelist or teacher, if they're seeking that title, they probably don't need it.
Yeah.
But if they are doing the work and they gain not the reputation, but the honor of filling that role, whatever it is, I think that's when it's truly revealed. But there is a lot of pressure, not just to be right, but to be on. I hope, and I say this to every minister who comes into our church. There's absolutely no pressure. You are here because of your integrity, not your abilities, not your giftings. You're here because of your integrity. The bottom line is, I want my people to be around you. If you preach, great. If you teach, that's okay. If you just get up and sing a few songs, I'm good with that. Whatever you feel to do, I want you to know you have total liberty here. And I also want you to know there is no pressure to perform. Whatever God lays on your heart to do it. And there's a number of reasons I do that. One of the biggest reasons is I evangelized for 6 years, and I was in places where I felt pressured to conjure something up. And I know for certain, because they've told me, that people who are used in the gifts of the Spirit, specifically the gift of knowledge and the gift of prophecy, have those experiences where they're pressed upon to exercise the gift. It's God's gift. It's God's gift, and how He wants to administrate that in their life. I think we need to not have pressure on them, not just to be right. And by the way, it takes time to be right. So I've seen prophecies come, and I thought, ain't no way. To me personally, ain't no way. 4 years later, boom, happened. I was like, good grief.
Yeah.
I was so carnal back then, So it takes time to be right, but then also taking off that pressure to perform.
Yeah,
they are mortal. These men of God who fill these fivefolds, all of them, not just the prophets. They are mortal men, and they can succumb to pressure, undue pressure by the people of God.
Yeah. Well, even in the Bible, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon them. It didn't say they just walk around prophesying all the time.
Right.
The Lord had to move on them for them to give a word.
That's a beautiful thing.
And if He didn't move, they didn't have anything to say.
Yeah.
Right.
So we can't just expect, this isn't a show where I pay my $1 and you give me something.
I was having a conversation with someone just recently about the gift of the Holy Ghost and speaking in tongues. And it was someone who believed that the gift of tongues is not for everyone.
Yeah.
And that, so she asked me, she said, could you speak in tongues right now? And I said, no. She said, why not? And I said, because it came upon them. And that's the exact example I use. The utterance comes from God.
Yeah.
And I said, I couldn't just drop everything and speak in tongues right now, just like I don't believe, well, God can use anybody, but I don't know that a prophet could just walk up to you and give you a word. Yeah. You see a prophet in Cracker Barrel after service and say, you didn't come to me. What do you have? You know what I mean? I'm not sure that it's there right then unless God moves, because all of that is motivated by the Spirit of God and Him placing it upon you.
Those gifts can be quenched, but when we start trying to conjure them up, that's when we get into witchcraft.
Right. Exactly.
That's when we get into witchcraft.
That's good.
Like example, we were going to my brother's church for just a brief period during our transition, and my wife has always wanted a boy. Like, she's just wanted a boy, and so we had.
Well, she has you, and it's like this man.
I'm a boy.
This man has to produce another man.
Yeah. Yeah, because the world needs another one of me.
I thought you were trying to say that his wife already has a boy.
That's what
I
first
would never do that.
Head.
Now my brother, he would do that, but I would never do that.
My firstborn is 4 years old, and the other day my wife asked her, I got 2 boys, and goes, no, you got 3 boys. You got me and Everett and Daddy.
That's hilarious.
I was like, she does take care of all of us.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, just that in that service, a lady who I would never have considered a prophetess or just came up and told Alyssa, the Lord has heard you and you will have a son.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what she said.
Yeah.
And then she left, and that was the only time that I ever saw her.
Yeah.
And we did have, but it took a few years.
Yeah.
We had Emmy. We thought, when we got pregnant with Emmy, like, here comes the boy. No, we were wrong.
Yeah.
But Alyssa was like, no, I was promised a boy.
Yeah.
And so we have Ian, and he is a promise.
Yeah.
And so, I believe that God absolutely does use men and women to prophesy. And not, like, to your point, not everybody who prophesies is a prophet. I get that. But he still does it. And I forgot about one person. There is somebody that I know that is Sister Deborah Smith out of Texas is a prophetess, straight up.
Yeah.
She told me stuff that no one knows about me except Jesus, and she knew.
Yeah.
So I 100% believe.
I think God is so conscious of His bride that there may be more prophets and prophetesses among us than we realize, because He calls them to be discreet. Just like you had mentioned, she knows, she spoke under the utterance of God things that nobody knew but Jesus. Mm-hmm. And that was very discreet, I'm assuming. And so there may be more of that happening than we even realize, as is the case with most everything God does. There's more happening than we realize.
Yeah.
Let's pull this conversation to a close. I want to finish up here. I want to hear a little bit more about what you're doing now, and what challenges are you facing as a and you don't have to get into compromising your ministerial ethics and tell details and names and things going on in your congregation, but if you could paint with a broad brush and speak in generalities as specifically as you can, what challenges are you facing in the 21st century church planning and pastoring that you didn't really anticipate?
Okay, so to talk about the first part, what we're doing now, I'm in the process of going through some training to start a recovery class in our city.
That's awesome.
Because I was at a NAM retreat. I work with North Mississippi. I'm part of the NAM team for North Mississippi.
That's cool.
Now.
Yeah.
Or I should say for Mississippi. I just work in the north part of Mississippi.
Yeah.
And the pastor there that was the visiting minister made a statement that I stopped and I thought, I don't have a good answer for this. But the question he asked was this. He said, if your church closed its doors today, what impact would it have on your community? And I thought,
wow,
nothing. except for the people that go to church here, because there's not a lot that we're doing for our community in a whole. And so it really made me start thinking about how can we help out. And so I talked to my team. I was like, look, we're going to start a recovery class to help people with addictions, because that's rampant, and they need that. They need somewhere to turn, and what better place to turn than the church?
Yeah.
And so I'm in the process of doing that training. And the second thing, I talked to my assistant pastor about creating a financial literacy curriculum.
That's awesome.
That we can offer to the community for free. I mean, for us, it may sound simple, but budgeting, there's so many people have no idea what that word even means. Yeah. Much less how to do it.
Yeah.
Checking account, they don't have a clue what that is.
Yeah.
Savings, like there's so much that I take for granted every day. It's just what we do, that some people have no concept.
Yeah.
So those are two things that we're working on putting in place for our church and our community, because if, God forbid, that our doors ever shut, but if it came to a point where we would have to shut our doors, I would want our community to be so, not necessarily outraged, but hurt over it, that they would want us to stay open. And so that was something that kind of made me start thinking, like, okay, like we have a great church, we have great services, the Holy Ghost moves, people are getting the Holy Ghost, are getting baptized, all that's happening. But as far as just my normal community who doesn't go to church, what do we offer them at all, if anything? And we don't have the resources to do some of the stuff that some of the churches do, but that we can do.
Yeah.
So we're going to focus on building that.
That makes me think of what I was teaching last night on Jonah. Jonah in Nineveh developed a very bad attitude toward those people. And in the end, God asked him the question. In the very last verse of the book of Jonah, God asked the question, do you really want me to destroy these people who don't know their right hand from their left? And that question, I taught that last night. You and I talked some about that last night. That question is eating me alive right now, because you just mentioned people don't know how to handle a budget, don't know how to facilitate a checking account, addictions, drugs, alcohol, all the things. We are careening toward a modern day Nineveh, and I have to be careful. We have to be careful as ministers to not despise the people where God has called us to minister. You know, Memphis doesn't have a great reputation. You haven't said a single negative word about it. This whole podcast, you have not said a single negative word about it. And that lets me know God doesn't call us to love lovely places. He calls us to reach cities of wickedness. That's what Nineveh was. It was a wicked city. When addiction is running rampant, when alternative lifestyle is becoming not just accepted, but shoved into the lives of our children. When prostitution's not a problem anymore. People are giving it away for free. I know that was a little too strong, but I felt like saying it just like that.
Totally fine.
Witchcraft is it's being pursued. That's Nineveh, and God called Jonah there, and after he delivered his word, he climbed up on that eastern ridge and he said, I'm just waiting on God to destroy everything. And God had to bring him through a process of correction and ask him that last question. I love how the book of Jonah ends. It's with a question. Do you really think I should destroy these people who don't know their right hand from their left? I believe God was calling Jonah to Nineveh, not just to deliver a word, get right or else. I believe God was calling Jonah to Nineveh to upend that carnal culture.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
To teach those people their right hand from their left. And to teach those people, here's how you live a good lifestyle, a wholesome lifestyle, a righteous lifestyle. Not just, this is what the oneness of God is. This is what the new birth is. This is what holiness, separation from the world is. As ministers in the 21st century, as long as the Lord tarries, the longer he tarries, we're going to have to become more and more proactive about, It's astounding, but we're having to be educators.
Yeah.
We're having to be. I was taught how to handle a budget and a checking account in high school. It's not happening today.
Mm-mm.
So we're having to become that as the church, and it's so encouraging to hear you say that, because God's dealing with me about that here. God's dealing with you about that there. I got a feeling that there's a bunch of God-called pastors that are being dealt with those same things from God. He's dealing about those things with him. So it's amazing.
Can I share an interesting fact with you about?
Yeah, I'd love
Jonah?
that. Yeah.
He never left Nineveh. He died there.
Yeah.
He stayed and pastored roughly 40 years.
That's amazing.
And he gave his life and pastored the people that he hated. In history, if you go and look at history, there's a 40-year span in that time where Nineveh became a righteous city.
Yeah.
And then after he dies, then it goes back.
Yeah.
But while he was there, he made all the difference.
Yeah.
And so just if any pastors or ministers watch this, don't sell yourself short.
Yeah.
Because you don't know the impact you're having in your city.
Yeah.
You can change a city. One person can change a city.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. The more we get, like, further and further, as you said, like, the Lord tarries even more. Like, I have to admit, when we moved here for my job, like, I thought, man, Knoxville, like, that it could have been a lot worse. So, you know, working for the government, it was kind of a random assignment. And I was like, I could have ended up a lot of places, right? And I was so thankful to be in Knoxville. And I really thought, like, oh, that's a good city. I'm sure it's good values and everything. But even in a city that I perceived as being a good place, like, I followed a car home yesterday that had all sorts of Wiccan bumper stickers and stuff, and I just prayed God's blessings over that person.
Here in the Bible Belt.
Here in the Bible Belt, in a city that I would have thought would have been, you know, family values and all this, there is still so much wickedness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's insane. When you were talking about Jonah yesterday, all I could think about was, like, even Nineveh, I would have said, oh, it's a city consumed by vileness. You know what I mean? Even I could see comparisons to people that I know here in this metropolitan area who don't know right from left.
Yeah. It's astounding.
It's crazy. And I mean, thankful that we've got, you know, like you said, we need to become educators on a spiritual and in some senses a practical level.
Absolutely.
In order to change our city.
And that's what Sunday Life is, or After Sunday is all about. That's what Sunday Life is about too. That's what After Sunday is all about. Right. Taking the spiritual, making it practical, and reinforcing who we are and what we're doing in the kingdom. Yeah. And man, thanks so much for coming to Knoxville. I really appreciate it. And you know, I know you just got into town today. You drove like 7 hours with a lot of females and one other guy. You know, I know there's a lot of other things you could have done tonight, but thanks for taking some time and talking to us. It's a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And we'll do it again. We'll do it again.
Absolutely.
We'll absolutely again. Awesome co-hosting tonight. Enjoyed it.
Do my best.
Great time.
Yes, sir. Can I put a plug in real fast?
Do it.
We're recording this on Thursday night. Usually that's not our usual night. So that means that this episode will be released, and you're going to be able to get on our Facebook page, Tower of Pentecost.
Yeah.
So get on Tower of Pentecost Facebook page, anyone who's watching, Sunday morning, I guess.
Yeah.
And view it live, right? So
11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be teaching, and then at noon, Brother Flowers will be preaching. So
So if you want to hear more from these two awesome ministers, Brother Flowers as our guest, I'd encourage anyone who's watching now to get on our Facebook page this Sunday starting at 11 and to hear from you.
I think we could put the link somewhere in the description, couldn't we, Skylar? Skylar's really smart. He can make that happen. The link will be in the description.
Absolutely.
God bless y'all. Thank you again for being with us tonight.